Now that we're on river left, or on the left side of the river as it flows downstream, we need to change our cast. If we tried to do a double spey off of our right shoulder, something would feel really strange, and when we went to cast, our fly would still be on the downstream side of us, and we'd inevitably hit ourselves in the face. We prevent this collision by switching casts, and the cast we're going to learn right now is the snap T. Just like we did with the double spey, we're going to break the snap T down into 5 steps. The first one is a lift. Remember, every cast begins with a lift. No casts ever, especially here, begin with a pull. This brings us to step 2. After we've completed our swing and we're on the dangle and we've done our lift, we're now going to somehow reposition our fly to land on the upstream side of our body. Now, of course, there are a lot of sloppy ways that we can make that happen. We can simply flick it upstream, but that's going to be inconsistent every time. So the key is finding a motion or a movement where we can maintain consistency and always have an effortless cast. Step 2, we're going to set our anchor. Just like we did on the other side of the river, where we position the anchor 1 rod's length in front of us and slightly out to the side, we're going to do the same thing with the snap T. If you recall, the anchor is the part of your line where your leader and your fly line come together. Now you may have some confusion, because even though you've heard of the snap T, you've also heard of the circle C, and you're probably wondering the difference between the two. I'll show you in just a moment. Starting at the water, step 1 lifts and it transitions immediately into step 2. What step 2 is going to have us do is draw our rod tip in an oval upward motion. Watch this. Do you notice that I start and finish in the exact same spot? If we have a longer line, we may be able to bring our rod tip back further to the left. What I don't want to see you do is start with your rod tip here and finish with your rod tip here. That looks like this. Doing that motion will bring us right back into that bloody L that we discussed earlier, which we all know we don't want. So again, starting in one spot in the river, lifting and transitioning immediately into step 2, which will reposition your fly on the upstream side of your body. Whether we're doing a snap T or circle C depends on the size and width of the oval or circle I'm drawing with my rod tip. You'll notice that a circle C is a very wide motion. Watch my rod tip, it goes way around. This is going to be beneficial for if you have a heavy sink tip or a heavy fly. Personally, I prefer more of a snap T or an oval shape that kind of meets the snap T and the circle C in the middle. If you have a shorter line, you can get away with even just the most simple of a snap. The circle C is wider, more circular, and you notice that it even goes further over to the right side of my body. The snap T is more of a karate chop. It's more of a straight up and down motion, but if you really were to inspect it, it's kind of like a flower petal shape. Regardless of whether you choose the circle C or the snap T, what you need to make sure to do with either cast is have it so that your rod tip is back at the water before your anchor and fly have hit the water on the upstream side of you. I'll show you what I mean. My rod tip is back at the water and my fly just hit now, versus my fly and tip have hit the water and I drag the rod tip back downstream. We don't want to do that. Now remember, the whole purpose here is to make it so that our anchor lands 1 rod length away from us and slightly out to the side. If you draw your rod tip too steep above yourself, the anchor lands too close to your body. If you draw your rod tip too far out to the riverbank, you land your anchor too far away from you. If you draw the entire stroke extended, the entire thing lands far away from you. There are situations where you may want this to happen. A good example is when you don't have that much space behind you. By having your anchor farther out, it means that you're going to have a more shallow D-loop and therefore won't catch all the trees that are in close proximity behind you. Pretend there's a line running down the middle of your body, and if you draw your rod tip too far to the right, it's inevitable that you won't have time to bring your rod tip back to the left before your line has hit the water. Try to instead just meet in the middle. If you start with your rod tip downstream and then don't complete your circle and you finish with your rod tip in front of you, you will inevitably end up with a bloody L. Just like with the double spey, we need to finish step 2 in the water so that we can begin step 3 on that gradual incline. If you begin this cast with a pull rather than a lift, and or if you apply too much power, you can end up cracking your line like a whip on the other side of you. Inevitably, you will end up eventually losing your fly. The other problem with this is that your anchor ends up bouncing and it doesn't land where you want it to. Now that we've covered step 2 and you know where you need to land your anchor, steps 3, 4, and 5 remain the same as what we learned in the last chapter. Step 3 is still going to start at the water. It's still going to wind itself up, no straight lines. Your tempo is going to create that beautiful white mouse. Step 3 is going to transition into that circle up whilst creating that D. Be sure to close the gap in the back here. Remember, short line, short lift, medium line, medium lift, long line, long lift, always drifting back and up. And even though we're slightly canted on an outward angle, we're still aligning our hands to come forward into step 5 and straight line path into our forward delivery. Remember that you want to have your entire body aligned and your chest facing the target. There should be 0 crossing over.